Welcome to The Authority File, the podcast that features conversations about the life cycle of scholarly communication. I'm Bill Mickey, the editorial director at Choice. We talk a lot about open access on this podcast, and models for open access monographs are an especially interesting topic for us. We've been fortunate enough to have MIT Press guest for several series to talk about its Direct-to-Open program, a collective funding model that opens the press's monographs across STEM and the humanities. Over the last few years, we've talked about its origins, launch, and progress, but no matter who we're talking to regarding open access, we typically only speak anecdotally about one of the most important participants in OA monograph publishing, researchers themselves. Well, that changes with this four-part series underwritten by our friends at MIT Press, where we discuss the benefits that authors see from publishing their texts via the direct-to-open model, and some of these benefits might be ones you haven't thought of. Joining me in this series are Dr. Janaki Srinivasan, Associate Professor of Digital South Asian Studies at the University of Oxford's Internet Institute and author of The Political Lives of Information. David Kunkel, Professor of Media Studies at Northern Illinois University and author of Person, Thing, Robot, a 2024 Choice Outstanding Academic Title. And Amy Harris, MIT Press Senior Manager, Library Relations and Sales. In this second episode of our series, I'm joined once again by David and Amy as we elaborate on the benefits that authors, readers, and the research ecosystem receive from open access monograph publishing models. Okay, David, we'll stick with you for this next question. One of the things that came up in our initial call for this series was how open publishing allows authors to feel more confident in asking students or researchers to actually read their books. And I'm wondering, David, if you could talk more about that hesitation or awkwardness around promoting non-open books and how OA counteracts that.
Yeah, let me put it in sort of two instances or examples. One is when students take a class from a particular researcher, it's often because they want to engage that researcher in his or her research. But if your book is one of these $100 or $150 monographs, how do you get your students to pay that kind of money knowing that your name is on that cover, right? And you can't just give it away for free because there are contractual obligations that you have in terms of how you distribute your content and who has access to it, et cetera. When the book is open access and it is, again, a downloadable PDF, there is not that sort of embarrassing moment where you find yourself asking your students to buy a book that your name is on. Now, we all know in the academic publishing field, no one is getting rich here. I mean, it's, this is not a for-profit kind of endeavor. But our students don't know this. Mm-hmm. And, they only see what their dollar amounts are, and they see textbooks as being expensive. And anything we can do to bring down that price of inclusion and getting them involved in this content, I think is absolutely crucial and something that we should all be focused on as educators. Yep. The tuition is high enough, and the fees and everything else we add, then they send them over to the bookstore and walk away with a $500, $600 book purchase, I think is just, something we can actively work towards alleviating, if not eliminating altogether. The other place where I've seen this happen is when you give a talk at a conference or a keynote at an event, and people want to know more about your research, and you say, well, you should get the book. Again, you feel like you're selling something. Yeah. And then you feel like your presentation is about selling the book and not selling the ideas and the research that is in the book. And when you're not having to say, check out my merch table at the back, but you can say, here's a QR code, go ahead and get yourself a copy. It's open access. And even if you're marginally curious, you've got nothing to lose, you can check it out. So as Amy said earlier, we've discovered in making books open access, not only are people actually getting and reading the book, but they are citing the book and they are contacting us, authors, and saying, hey, I was curious, I downloaded it, I read your book, I'm really intrigued by this, I'm working on this other stuff, and all of a sudden your research network grows as a result of it. So the book is no longer a barrier to involvement. It is actually something now in open access form that really facilitates building a strong research network and making connections with people.
Oh yeah, and if I may chime in
Of
too,
course.
it was really interesting for me to hear from our authors that this was something that made them nervous, and that open access was making them feel more confident to talk about their research with people. And one thing I've learned from nearly 20 years of publishing books is that our authors are the best advocates for their work. In an information saturated environment where attention is at a premium, they're the beating heart of any publicity and promotion plan. So anything that makes our authors feel more empowered to speak about their work publicly and engage with students, interested readers, other researchers, federal agencies, that's a win for us.
Hmm.
I can just add to that. I had a little dust up on social media, as one does, and this guy was interacting with me, and he asked a question of me. And I said, "Well, you can just you just check out the book. There's a lot of research on this, and here's the book." And he wrote back to me, "I'm not going to purchase your book just to find out what you think." I'm like, "You don't have to. You just download it."
There you go. This is really it's fascinating to hear this because anecdotally some of the things we've heard in talking about OA is sort of the researchers. I don't want to say reluctance, but maybe just sort of awareness level of OA is not so great, and it sometimes takes some convincing for them to publish OA, and so it's really nice to hear these comments around the benefits of that and how it actually works in a way that's beneficial to the authors. I'm wondering, curious on that note, Amy, do you encounter that at all with bringing authors on board with this?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And I do think that there are some generational changes. Our younger authors, younger scholars are more familiar with OA. I think that some of the issues that people brought up in the past related to quality, that has been put to bed to some
Right.
degree. And
Good.
speaking from the press's perspective, we really made a point to say our OA works are no different from the books that we publish in the paywalled model. They're peer reviewed, they're edited, they receive the same marketing and promotion, they're going to be printed. They are of the same quality as that you can expect from any MIT Press publication.
Hmm.
And I think that has helped. But also, of course, we hear from folks who say, "Can't we just do this in the normal way? And then maybe in a few years, I'll think about whether or not open access is right for me." But I think that as more people publish their work open access, then they're hearing from their colleagues.
Yeah.
This is the benefit that I saw, and you don't maybe need to worry about X, Y, and Z. So it's sort of a work in process, and I think we've only had in doing the direct open program, we were in a position where we were going to our authors to ask permission to do this. And we knew it would be popular with folks, but I think we've only had about 8% of the authors who could be eligible for the program say, I'm not comfortable with that. So we've had really strong support from our author base.
Nice. Good. So David, building on those benefits, and can you talk about the advantages of open OA in terms of reaching English as a second language speakers?
Oh yeah, definitely. This is something that I had not anticipated. It's something I heard from students elsewhere in the world who were saying, I really appreciate it when I get the PDF because unlike ebook that uses a proprietary format, or unlike a printed book, I can cut and paste sentences or entire sections out of the PDF into one of the translation platforms like Google Translate or ChatGPT and get pretty good approximations of something in my language. And what they tell me is that they're learning English, and one of the ways they're learning English is by reading and reading research documents in their field. But having this ability to get some really quick and easy translation support as they are trying to make sense of the English text and get it in whatever language they happen to speak or write is something that I did not anticipate with regards to the open access model. But it really does lower, the bar for access to the research. And I know from my own experience as a student, wanting to read various publications that were never translated and having to actually struggle through a foreign language to make sense of the document. And now with all these digital tools and platforms that we have at our fingertips, the open access publication model, and especially the delivery in an open format like a PDF document, really makes it very easy to cut and paste and have that accessibility to your native tongue, whether it's something that is commonly translated or whether it's something that is less translatable. You have some support in your attempt to read these things.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Um, so when we think about open access, one of the first things that comes to mind is as we've mentioned already, journal articles. But how does OA factor into the sort of entire project ecosystem? And I'm thinking like open media, archives, data, case study interviews, as part of your disciplines.
Well, I will admit that my discipline is publishing,
Yeah.
and my experience is mostly in publishing books and journals. But I have a strong appreciation for open educational resources and also open educational objects, because I think that having resources like that professors, instructors can draw upon,
Mhm.
that are openly available, and they know that they can remix, use, share them, is really important for building resources that can really be appreciated by the community. I think that open data, if I had time on my hands, I would definitely be interested in open data sets, because it's both extremely important but also extremely complex.
Mhm.
And the importance of that for science, I think, is really crucial. And I have to admit, I think my boss this is her bailiwick, is open data sets and that kind of thing. But yeah, it all flows together, and creating more open objects that can be used by many different communities is a way of making all of this more accessible and inclusive.
Right. I mean, perhaps there could be like a cascading effect where, as more things become open, and those benefits become more obvious, it just sort of impacts other types of media formats and that kind of thing. So, David, any comments on your end?
I'll just echo what Amy said, especially about open data sets. I think, especially in the social sciences, when you're dealing with either quantitative or qualitative data,
Yeah.
having that data available to users and readers who want to dig further into what your data sets were and how you manipulated them and found your results, I think is really crucial for two reasons. One is it makes research transparent.
Hmm.
And that's crucial for educating the next generation of scholars as they see how other people have collected data, used data, and made inferences from data. And if they can actually see the data sets and work with the data sets, that provides, I think, a really good pedagogical tool.
Hmm.
I also think it's crucial in the social sciences as also in the hard sciences for validating research results. It's one thing to take a set of data and write it up from your own perspective, but if somebody else can take the same data or similar data and either validate your research or find reasons why it might need some additional work, I think that's how you advance thinking in any discipline. And even if we don't do a lot of this in the humanities, certainly in the social sciences and the sciences, this is crucial to advancing the disciplines.
Hmm. Excellent. Um, Amy, I'm wondering if there are any challenges with open book publishing in terms of copyright mandates. I'm thinking especially with publishing backlist content.
Well, speaking of publishing backlist content, yes. And I should preface this answer by saying that when we work to move like paywalled archive titles or backlist titles to open access, we call that a backflip at MIT Press. Of course, you're flipping a backlist book from being paywalled to being open access and applying a new Creative Commons license. Often, when we're working on backflips, it's either because an author has requested it or because we've received a grant or special funds to make certain works OA. When it's an author request, it's easy because we can just update our publishing agreement with the author, apply the Creative Commons license of their choice, and work on updating files and metadata from there. when the idea doesn't originate with the author, we have to go back to that person or people or their heirs to negotiate that change. And that takes real staff time and dedicated effort. Not everyone you contact may be interested in open access, and we take our authors' wishes and their consent really seriously in this regard. But for the new front list titles, not backflips like the titles in Direct to Open, this is something that we can simply address with our authors at the start of the publishing process. That way, it's a part of our regular workflows, and it's much easier than looking back. I think, too, that this differs from publisher to publisher because we've all had different contracts over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us were wiser than others. And we might not have known it at the time, kind of future-proofing
Right.
our asks. And I admire Charles Watkinson at Michigan because years ago, they put something in all of their publishing agreements that said, was basically a line that authors could review and consider along the lines of, if the press ever gets funds to make this work open access in the future, I grant that permission. So they have that to go back to, whereas we have to have a staffer, contact someone and go
Right.
through that process again.
Renegotiate. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Excellent. You just heard from David Gunkel, professor of media studies at Northern Illinois University and author of Person, Thing, Robot, a 2024 Choice Outstanding Academic Title, and Amy Harris, MIT Press Senior Manager, Library Relations and Sales. Join us next week when we welcome to the program Dr. Janaki Srinivasan, Associate Professor of Digital South Asian Studies at the University of Oxford's Internet Institute and author of The Political Lives of Information. Janaki will talk about why it was particularly important for her to publish her title open, and Amy will quantify citation advantages and citation diversity for D2O authors. This episode was brought to you with generous support from MIT Press. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising director, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant, Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.